First on the docket, the killing of George Floyd. For those of you who do not know, George Floyd was a man that was arrested by the Minneapolis Police Department. Apparently, the police were responding to a business on the allegation of an alleged forgery. Apparently, what it turned out to be is the store owner believed that George Floyd may have passed a counterfeit $20 bill, and the store's policy was to contact the police anytime that takes place. When the police arrived, they made contact with Mr. George. There is new video out today, surveillance video from a store owner where all this transpired, where it shows that Mr. George was taken out of a vehicle, handcuffed immediately, does not appear to be resisting. At one point, though, it appears as though he may have fallen down or sat down, but didn't look like anything particularly out of the ordinary of what you would see in a normal arrest. And then the video that most people have seen already shows that the officer literally sat on Mr. Floyd's neck for 7 to 10 minutes of that 10-minute video until he was placed on a gurney with bystanders literally telling the officers, "You've killed him. He is unconscious." And the officers did nothing other than try to keep people back and not render any assistance whatsoever. Well, those 4 officers were fired yesterday afternoon, as we discussed in yesterday's video. And you know the mayor doesn't announce a firing like that until he goes to his police chief and asks, is any of this defendable in any way? There are police use of force experts that are saying that this was the classic example of everything gone wrong. The man was not resisting, he was handcuffed, and yet the officer continued to remain on his neck and the other officers holding him down. Now, of course, the Floyd family is calling for charges to be brought against these 4 officers. Obviously, I think it's going to have to wait and see until we see what the autopsy results come back as. Obviously, we want to look at any type of pre-existing injury, also whether if there were any illegal substances in the system that may have contributed to this factor. Now, regardless of any of those factors, if the coroner says this was a homicide, those 4 officers, if they haven't done so already, need to lawyer up big time. The officer that was sitting on Mr. Floyd's neck, depending on how you count it, 7 minutes to 10 minutes, sitting on his neck when he's not resisting, I think one could inform the intent, particularly when one is being told that he is going unconscious and do nothing about it, that the intent for a murder charge could be brought. We've talked about this before. Complicity. If you aid, encourage, abet, or assist somebody in a crime, you can be responsible just like they are, even though you did nothing other than basically sit around and, in this case, hold Mr. Floyd's legs or hold somebody back so that the officer could continue to sit on the neck. Certainly, if murder charges, first or second degree murder, are not brought, I would anticipate some sort of criminally negligent homicide or reckless homicide type of charges. And I'm sure we'll have people complain, I'm not giving the officers presumption of innocence. Oh, yes, I am. I am giving them the presumption of innocence. That's why I'm saying let's wait and see what the results are. But on the video, it doesn't look good. They need an attorney. Bottom line. They're lucky so far. Only thing they've lost is their job, because they could lose their freedom, their liberty here real soon. The George Floyd case. That's right. No charges have been brought yet as it relates to the death of George Floyd. And we have to say murder. This murder was on video. We have the video. We've shown it where the officer, who has been identified, which we'll get to in a minute, has his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck over the 10 minutes that the video is running. There are individuals that are observing this and recording this saying that Mr. Floyd is unconscious. Mr. Floyd, in fact, is saying that he can't breathe. This is unexcusable. Now, there have been riots that have taken place out there in Minneapolis and some in other jurisdictions as well, as kind of a flow over. And I understand people's frustration. I get frustrated by this. Everyone gets frustrated when the system doesn't work. And at a certain point, people just have had enough. But you have to keep it peaceful. We are a country where peaceful protest is what has to take place. You can't go in and loot the stores in Minneapolis like the Target that was looted last night. That is not protesting. That is stealing. That is burglary. You can't destroy and take other people's property because you're upset about something that these officers from the Minneapolis Police Department did. It makes no sense to me. We've been able to identify 2 of the 4 officers involved in the murder of Mr. Floyd. The first officer is Derek Chauvin. Now, when I was watching the video, and when former officer Chauvin had his knee on this man's neck, he almost looked like he was enjoying it. It's very almost sadist type of look on his face, where he is literally enjoying it. It's bringing him pleasure. It's truly disturbing. When you watch that video closely, you literally are seeing him kill a man before your very eyes. It's disgusting. Well, and I thought to myself, this isn't the first time this has happened. No way. And we know that former officer Derek Chauvin has had 18 official complaints. So that's people actually taking the time to go down and file an official complaint. That takes time out of people's days, so they were serious about it. 2 of those matters ended in discipline, although he only received letters of reprimand. We also know that this officer in 2006 was involved in a police shooting where apparently a man brandished a sawed-off shotgun. In 2008, Chauvin also shot a man who, while responding to a call, the suspect reached for another responding officer's firearm, and Officer Chauvin shot him. And apparently he was awarded a Medal of Valor from the Minneapolis Police Department at one time. I don't know the details about that, but once I do, I will get them for you. The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, he is demanding that charges be brought and are wondering why charges have not been brought. Very good questions indeed. Now, the mayor obviously is not a prosecutor and doesn't say what charges need to be brought, but I think based upon watching these videos again, as it relates to Officer Derek Chauvin, first-degree murder charges are certainly appropriate. The other officers could be charged with first-degree murder under a complicity theory, no doubt, and failing to act. They cannot take, the Auschwitz defense and say, oh, I was just following orders. No. Those officers could have stepped in at any time and said, whoa, officer, or now former officer Derek Chauvin, you're done. Let's get him in the car. He's handcuffed. Now, just the other day, I told you the problem that I have with a lot of police organizations is that they always come up with a reason to defend the officer. And I get it. They are going to give their fellow police officers the benefit of the doubt. But as it relates to the murder of George Floyd, even police organizations are completely appalled by the conduct. Specifically, the Houston police chief, Art Acevedo, who's the president of an organization that represents large city police departments and police chiefs, said, quote, "This is unfathomable for an officer to put a knee into a handcuffed suspect's neck." William Johnson, who's the executive director of the National Association of Police Organizations, which is kind of a big organization that represents lots of police organizations, says he can't say for certain, but he says he can't see any legal justification, any self-defense justification, or any moral justification for these officers to engage in such conduct. I'm telling you, that is huge when the police organizations are saying enough is enough. This was not defensible in any way possible. So hopefully people can look at it, and maybe finally most police officers go out there, try to do their best to serve and protect. The bad ones have to go, and the bad ones usually have been identified previously, but they just get letters of reprimand. Now, both the FBI and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension are investigating Mr. Floyd's murder. For the feds to get involved and bring a civil rights case, they must show that not only was there excessive force used, but that the officers also willfully violated someone's constitutional rights. Well, I think that that's pretty appropriate. How about the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment, violation of one's 14th Amendment right to due process under the law? These officers acted as judge or prosecutor, judge, and executioner. Although the Department of Justice rarely gets involved in cases like this, I cannot see a much clearer case given the fact that it's on video. And thank goodness it was on video. These officers all had body-worn cameras on them. It'd be interesting to see what the interaction was and how it was different. But I believe it's going to show some very important angles that Mr. George Floyd was not resisting in any way. Now, the other officer that has been identified is Officer Todd Tau. Now, he's the officer who is standing away, kind of holding the crowd back and trying to have people not videotape the incident. Well, guess what? This officer had 6 incidents of complaints, and one actually was involved in a lawsuit in 2017, which the city settled, where there were allegations of use of excessive force. The other 2 officers have no history of complaints or any sort of violations against the community. We're going to watch this case closely, as the rest of the United States will watch this case, and I think it's going to be a true test for our judicial system. We can't wait weeks, we can't wait months for charges and arrests to be brought. This is on video. We can see what took place, and prosecutors should be moving rather expeditiously to bring charges forward. Now, we will obviously give every one of the officers the presumption of innocence. And who knows, maybe there's some chance that some other cause was the cause of Mr. Floyd's death, other than now former Officer Chauvin putting his knee into Mr. Floyd's neck for up to 10 minutes, clearly for 7, up to 10 minutes potentially. I would be very surprised if the coroner comes back with any finding other than homicide. For anybody who has no idea what's going on in the world, George Floyd was a man in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who was being detained by police officers, and ex-police officer Derek Chauvin had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for about 10 minutes before the ambulance arrived, whereupon he was pronounced dead. When video came out about this incident, Officer Chauvin and 3 others were immediately fired. That never happens, ladies and gentlemen. And the district attorney yesterday really got things going when he said he wasn't really sure if a crime had been committed. Then you noticed things started to burn in Minneapolis, as well as other protests around the country. I'm not sure what video this district attorney was watching where he said he wasn't sure that the force was excessive. You don't have to look very far, because we talked about it yesterday. Even police officers that represented police organizations said that the conduct of Officer Chauvin was completely unacceptable and not permitted. There has been a lot of commentary by police officers that say this is why anything related to chokeholds or anything up by the neck is prohibited. Only if the officer feels that he is in a life or death situation should a chokehold or any kind of pressure to the neck area be applied. Needless to say, the governor and the mayor of Minneapolis all said that they are expecting quick justice. But obviously, it wasn't until today that now ex-officer Derek Chauvin has been charged. Now, he's only been charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter. So in the great state of Minnesota, one could be charged with first-degree murder, which is basically you kill someone after deliberation. You have second-degree murder, where you did something maybe really didn't intend for somebody to die. Third-degree murder that falls between manslaughter and third-degree murder charge. It's best explained by it's murder not based on having an intent to kill. Okay, third-degree murder, not really having the intent to kill. It's kind of like shooting a gun into a large group of people and saying, well, I really didn't mean to kill anybody. You knew you could probably kill somebody. This charge carries up to 25 years in prison, and a fine is possible of up to $40,000. Not sure why the prosecutors didn't charge second or first-degree murder in this particular situation, but we will see. The Minneapolis Police Department released a very redacted body-worn camera, but it's not really of the situation as it relates to Mr. Floyd. Now, the district attorney seemed to be very excited the fact that he has never charged a police officer or former police officer this quickly. And I think the question needs to be, why not? In most jurisdictions, when there's an officer-involved shooting, everybody gets to come in. The officer involved is immediately removed from the scene. He is given an attorney, usually by the Police Protective Association, rather quickly. Before that officer makes any statements whatsoever, he gets an opportunity to look at everybody else's statements so that he can see what was really going on. He doesn't get to lock himself into a statement. Could you imagine if in any other criminal case, a defendant didn't have to say anything until after he's been able to see absolutely everything prior to charges being filed? Unheard of. But they get to do it for the police. And there's two manslaughters that are possible in Minnesota. There's voluntary manslaughter, which carries up to 15 years of imprisonment, and involuntary manslaughter, which carries 10 years of imprisonment. Now, I understand that the district attorney has to continue to work with the police department and wants to make sure that everyone involved feels like they're getting due process. I respect that. But due process can move quickly. One of the reasons why people lose faith in the judicial system is that they don't feel that everyone is treated exactly the same. If you are in a position of power or you have wealth, that perhaps you get a few extra breaks that the rest of us would not. Additionally, people become very frustrated by the judicial process when they have ongoing investigations that take forever. And this is not a complicated case. Police officers investigate homicides on a daily basis, and they try to make those arrests usually within the first 48 hours. Why is that? That's when everything's fresh, everything's new. Now, we mentioned it the other day that we think that the police were probably waiting for blood results as it relates to the autopsy of Mr. Floyd. And the reason why they would probably consider that was because the 911 tape was released. And that was of the store owner who called in the alleged fictitious $20 bill that was used to purchase cigarettes. The individual on the phone states that the individual on the 911 call states, and we're assuming they're referring to Mr. Floyd, was the fact that he appeared to be drunk or intoxicated with some substance. It's not clearly stated. But as you can see from the videos, both the surveillance video from outside the store, as well as the video that was turned over that appeared on Facebook, Mr. Floyd does not appear to be resisting, which was in fact the original version of the police. It wasn't until the video showed up that they were corrected as to their facts. Now, obviously, here at Crime Talk, we believe in due process, and we will give ex-police officer Derek Chauvin the presumption of innocence that any defendant would be entitled to. As a criminal defense attorney, we're all for that. But we also believe in common sense, and justice should be swift, because justice delayed is justice denied. We also hope that everyone around the country will realize that you can go protest. No one would support people protesting more than me, as long as it is actually peaceful, okay? Because your First Amendment rights don't continue to the point where you get to go loot or vandalize other people's property. It simply is not the case.